Nothing about The Witcher 3 should feel real. It's a fairy tale game about a white-haired mutant who gets paid to kill ghosts, griffins, and whatever this is. But still, more than a decade after release, this game somehow feels more real than anything the industry has produced ever since. And honestly, this should be embarrassing for everyone else. Because nowadays, the biggest gaming companies have been chasing realism with basically unlimited money. They render skin pores in 4K, thousands of individual beard hairs, and ray trace small stones. But when you play those games, you just don't feel anything. But ask anyone who played The Witcher 3 and how real the world felt while playing it. And I promise you, nobody will talk about the graphics. They will tell you about how they helped a drunk warlord to find his family in the middle of a war. They will talk about the choice they made in some swamp, and they will tell you how they hopefully refused to put a baby in an oven. And what makes this even crazier? Before The Witcher 3 released, almost nobody had heard about CD Projekt Red. It was about 240 people in Warsaw at a company that started with 2 guys selling video games at a local marketplace, on a budget smaller than what most publishers spend on marketing alone. So the question is how? How does a fairy tale about monsters feel more real than an entire industry chasing photorealism? Why do people remember a side quest from 2015 and still feel bad about their choice? And the most ridiculous question, why does the man who invented the entire world of The Witcher refuse to play the game? Well, the answer to all of that starts in probably the ugliest place in the entire game, in the Swamp of Velen, where a drunk warlord just gave Geralt the most boring sounding and most forgettable quest you could think of. Please help me find my missing wife and daughter. Now sure, most of you probably know the questline of the Bloody Baron. And I need to be honest about my first playthrough. When I started The Witcher 3, I had no expectations for this game at all. So when this constantly drunk guy told me he would only share the information he had about Syria if I found his missing wife and daughter first, I was convinced I just picked up the most boring side quest in history. Because we've all played a quest like this before, probably hundreds of times, and we all know exactly how that would usually go in any AAA game. A yellow marker appears on your map, you follow a dotted line, and the missing wife and daughter sits in a cave, guarded by 3 bandits who share like 1 brain cell between all of them, and you press X to untie her, and she says, "Thank you, stranger," or even worse, you get a 5-minute dialogue that you forget right after. And then a pop-up rewards you with like 150 XP and a slightly better pair of boots. After that, you go back to the Baron and get your information. That's it. That's what I was prepared for. Because companies like Bethesda built a system that generates quests exactly like these on autopilot. And they even have their own name for it, which is called Realism system, which is a beautiful name for a machine that mass produces forgettable content. Anyway, so that's what I was prepared for. But in reality, what happened was completely different. And the longer I played this quest, the deeper it dragged me in. Because it turned out that this quest was anything but interchangeable. And the storytelling was so peak that I, myself, got more emotionally invested into solving this riddle than some problem that get thrown at me in real life. And that is because the story has such a real and natural way to place clues for you. See, when starting the quest, I had nothing bad in mind. But the cracks started showing real quickly. Everyone at the Baron's fortress described him as a great guy, but at the same time, nobody wants to talk about his wife. And if you go and talk to the Baron himself, he's actually very likable. He jokes with you, he drinks with you, and he talks about his family like a man who genuinely loves them. And through talking to him, the way his character is written, it pulled me in even more. Because usually in old worlds, a quest giver like him is usually like a vending machine. You talk to them once, they dispense a task, and then they stop existing. And honestly, the Baron has probably more personality than most main characters at some Ubisoft game. But then, CD Projekt found a way to make it feel even more real to you. Because after you go and talk to the Baron, Geralt does what an actual investigator would do. He walks through the family's home, tries to find hints at what happened, and while he's going through their bedroom, we as the players slowly realize that the story isn't like the Baron told us at all. See, initially the Baron said that he is 100% sure that his family must have gotten kidnapped, and therefore he tried to push Geralt and other players into believing him. But what he doesn't tell you is that he has a very heavy alcohol problem, that he fought with his wife for years, and that in the last night before he left, his wife was pregnant and lost a child due to another fight with the Baron. And slowly, you as the player realize that she wasn't taken, but that she left voluntarily. And over the next few hours, this whole quest line has you so emotionally torn between maybe the Baron will be able to change and thinking that it might be better that his wife does not return at all. But then, this quest goes somewhere I have never seen a mainstream game dare to go. Because while you are looking for the Baron's lost wife, Geralt learns through an old village mystic what happens to a child that was buried without a blessing and without a name. It doesn't just disappear, it comes back. As a creature the game calls a botchling. What follows is one of the heaviest scenes I have ever played, because now you are presented with two options. The first one is to kill the creature, but the second one is to convince the Baron to claim it. And if you choose to claim it, you don't get a cutscene. You get a long walk from a small little grave, somewhere hidden behind the fortress, all the way up to his doorstep. And during the entire time, you have to watch this deeply broken man, who by the way realized through the questline that he might be the problem why his family left. But you have to watch him, how he picks up the unborn child, carries her through the dark, all the way to his doorstep, where he has to bury it and give her a name she never got. And this is just one small part of why The Witcher 3 feels so real. And we'll get into many more examples in just a second. But what stories and games usually do is that they do the heavy lifting for you. They tell you who the bad guy is, they tell you who the hero is, and basically push you with that to make the right choices. The Witcher, however, it lets you decide who is good or who is bad, and along the way, it tries to make it as hard as possible for you to make that decision. Just like with the Baron. I mean, let's just think about how complex that decision is. On the one side, he caused all of the problems himself. He beat up his wife, he is a heavy alcoholic, and he was not even man enough to admit to you what he did, because he is scared that you might refuse to help him. On the other side, he is the guy who pays you, knows that he messed up, and desperately tries to fix everything. It's a constant back and forth for you as a player. Now, before we dive deeper into what happened to the Bloody Baron's family, I first need to tell you about the backstory of how this quest was made. Because this not only explains why this game feels so real, but might even be more insane than the quest itself. See, this questline was the first one Pavel Cesasko ever designed for The Witcher. Which, first of all, is an insane accomplishment, given the complexity and insane storytelling. But what makes it so crazy is that before a single line of dialogue existed, the script for this entire questline was already 40 pages long. Just the plot. For comparison, an entire Hollywood feature-length film runs at about 120 pages, including all the dialogue. CD Projekt spent a third of a movie on the skeleton of just one quest line. And the entire story with the botchling, this was also not invented for the game. See, Sasko has said openly that the team reached into old Slavic folk tales and used them to write the whole quest with the Bloody Baron. Now remember that detail, because those old folk tales are going to become very important later in this video. But it just gets crazier at this point, because after the release, the studio received a letter. It came from a father who had lost its own daughter when she was just a few months old. He wrote about this quest and about what that moment had meant to him. Now just think about this for a second. Some random quest in a monster hunting game had helped a grieving father to deal with the loss of his daughter in a better way. And I have to be honest with you, I remember more about just this one quest than I do about the entire story of Starfield. But again, this was just one quest in a game that has hundreds of stories like this. But the storytelling is only one part of the formula why this game feels so real. But the foundation of this good writing happens because of a policy, an actual rule inside CD Projekt Red that explains why playing the game yourself feels better than any trailer ever could. See, this rule started during the development. A designer pitched an idea. What if the player finds a couple scattered letters, collects them, brings them back, and gets a small reward? Sure, this would have been an easy way to add another few hours of gameplay. And at any other studio in the world, this would have probably gotten a thumbs up and someone would go and add it to the game. However, at CD Projekt Red, the lead quest designer had a standard answer for pitches like this. He always said, "We don't do fetch quests." And in case you're wondering what exactly counts as a fetch quest, there is a real quote from the same lead quest designer, Matthias, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name. But what he said accidentally described half the modern gaming industry. When I think of fetch quests, there is a picture of a shopping list in my mind. Get me 10 beer pelts, 5 eggs, and maybe 6 candles. Quests with little to no story around them. Quests that don't engage the player at all and are there just to add some extra hours to the gameplay. And he came up with that list as an example. And I guarantee you that you have probably played dozens of fetch quests like this. Because adding some extra hours of gameplay is not an accident in modern open worlds. It is the entire business model. Because this way, they can put a bigger number on the box. They can charge you more dollars per hour. They have more icons on the map. But we'll talk about that in just a second. Now, CD Projekt, on the other hand, they banned it completely. They had the policy that every single side quest needs a story, a twist, or a moral problem that in some way stays in your head. And while this ban sounds nice, it actually brought up a very unique problem. Because if you are not allowed to fill a world with hundreds of hours of filler content, someone actually has to sit down and fill these hundreds of hours with meaningful content. And this is where the numbers get absolutely stupid. The final script of The Witcher 3 is over 450,000 words long. That is roughly the size of the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy, written for one video game. Additionally, the game has had around 950 speaking roles, which means there are 950 characters with a voice, a name, and all of them have something to tell you. And just recording all of that took over 2.5 years. All of that adds up to about 35 hours of pure dialogue scenes. And that creates a problem you've probably never thought about. 240 people cannot hand animate 35 hours of conversations. That is almost physically impossible. So, CD Projekt built themselves an in-house tool that worked like an invisible camera crew. It took the finished voice recordings and automatically generated a first version of every dialogue scene. And only after that, human animators went in and polished the scenes that matter most. And I want to appreciate the irony right here, because other studios go ahead and use algorithms to generate the entire content so they can save on human costs, while CD Projekt used their algorithm only for the camera work so the humans could spend their time on writing and doing meaningful stuff. Now, what's important to mention here, just to be fair, no, the system was not perfect. Even the lead designer, whose last name I still can't pronounce, admitted that a handful of quests slipped through their filter. But just this one statement shows why The Witcher 3 feels so real. The lead designer goes and apologizes for a handful of mediocre quests, while other publishers try to tell you that machine-generated galaxies are the most exciting thing ever. And just to realize how far this no-filler rule actually goes, let's look at the most beloved, but at the same time, slightly unnecessary side activity in the entire game. Gwent. It's a card game that exists inside of taverns or when you're talking to random people. It's basically a side activity of a side activity. And CD Projekt could have easily made this a coin flip game, a dice game, or some other little time waster, and nobody would have complained. But instead, they went ahead and built a complete card game with fractions, deck building, counter strategies, and collectible cards hidden all over the world. And I can tell you from personal experience that this works a little too well. Because at some point in my playthrough, I stopped hunting the Wild Hunt entirely and started touring every single inn in the Northern Realms like a degenerate card shark. All because someone told me an innkeeper 3 villages away owned a rare card I was missing. And this quote-unquote unnecessary tavern game got so popular that CD Projekt later released it as its own standalone game. And this just shows what a bad filler policy looks like in practice. Because even the side content of the side content gets built with full attention and care. But let's take a step back, because when I asked myself why this game feels so real, I realized the quests, even as insane as they are only half the trick. Because when you think about what you actually do in an open world game, you usually spend hours, well, just traveling. And in most open worlds, what you actually do is to unlock every fast travel as quickly as you can, so you don't have to walk through this glorified loading screen. However, in The Witcher, this was a whole different story. Because yes, while they give you the option to fast travel, they make it so rewarding to wander through the map that a lot of times you end up just riding everywhere. And the best example for that is what you see when you first enter Whelan. Because there you see a tree full of corpses. And if you played The Witcher 3, you know exactly which tree I'm talking about. Now at first sight, you might think the game just tries to show you how brutal the war is getting and to set the stakes. But if you slow down and actually look closer at who is actually hanging there, you notice a ton of details. Because some of the guys hanging there are wearing the colors of the northern armies. Others wear Nilfgaardian black, and some others are just random villagers and bandits. But what it shows that these are guys from both sides of the war hanging from the same branches, next to ordinary farmers. And this tiny detail tells you more about the war than most games manage in a 6-hour campaign. Because what it tells you is that there is no good or bad side here. And if you talk to the locals, they don't even see it anymore. They just call the place the Hangman's Tree. It's basically a landmark now, and everyone just got used to it. Now, this entire tree, which again is a small little detail, was created with insane love to detail. Because when the developers talked about how Velen was built, they revealed what the design brief for the entire region was. And unlike other games, it wasn't like, create me a forest swamp biome with 40 points of interest. No, CD Projekt gave their designers the brief that they should create a region that shows the hunger, desperation, and hopelessness of the world. That was the entire assignment. They didn't care how much stuff can be crammed into it, but what emotion the entire region should give the player. And once you know that, and go through the entire region, you see how brilliantly they executed it. When you go and look at the refugees, you can see how full families are walking north, carrying everything they own, trying to reach Novigrad. You can see it in the villages, where half of the houses are burned down by soldiers. And you can see it on the old battlefields, where people are desperately looking through the corpses, trying to find anything useful. But the detail that got me the most is something that looks pretty boring at first, because it is the fields. See, when you take a look at the fields in Whelan, they're empty. And if you keep thinking about it, the reason becomes pretty dark. Because all of the men who are usually working on the fields got drafted into war, and now they are probably dead, which means there is no one left to work on those fields. And these are just little clues the game shows you without giving you a pop-up telling you this. And then there comes the full circle, because even the Bloody Baron just exists because of this chaos. Because he decided to switch sides at exactly the right moment and got handed a fortress as a reward. And here's what makes the war in the game feel so real. You almost never see the war yourself. Sure, there are a few cutscenes here and there, but there are no giant battle set pieces every 20 minutes. No scripted explosions or slow-motion cavalry charges. What you, as the player, see is what the war leaves behind. And this is exactly how most people experience a real war. Not as battle, but as everything around them slowly falling apart. Now let's compare that how games usually handle war. There's a cinematic intro that tells you that the country is at war. But when you then go and walk through it, every villager is smiling. And the biggest problem is somebody's lost cat that you need to find. But in The Witcher, the game shows you everything. And the insane part is how grounded in reality everything is. See, Velen wasn't built from a generic fantasy art concept. The team went to real Polish villages and the countrysides and took inspiration from it. And all of this together is why the writing feels never like a chore. Everything you see, every burnt house, every single refugee, and every corpse hides a detail when you look at it. And if CD Projekt Red released a game just like this, it would have already probably been a masterpiece. But they went a step further and thought about what happens to the people when they live in a world like this. And it turns out that during times of war, people in the Middle Ages start believing in all kinds of crazy things. The things their grandmothers told them that walks through the fields at midnight. And what happens to that who weren't given proper rights? And this is where those old Slavic folk tales I told you to keep in mind come into play. Because every single monster or creature in this game were invented hundreds of years ago by real people to explain things they couldn't really explain. And the best example for this is literally the first monster contract you pick up in the game. In the White Orchard region, a villager tells you about a devil that haunts an abandoned well and kills anyone who gets close. When you arrive there at noon, you see her. A woman in a white dress with white hair, and she screams like someone who died badly. The game calls her a noon wraith. And here's the thing you probably didn't know when fighting her. This noon wraith is in reality a polubnica, which translates to something like Lady Midday. And the Polish farmers were telling stories about her hundreds of years before the game even existed. And the official story of a noon wraith is something like this. They appear in the fields at exactly noon, on the hottest days of summer, and they take the workers who don't rest. And when you hear that description, you probably realize what this actually is. Because people really did die in those fields at noon. It's called a heat stroke. But if you're a farmer in medieval Poland and your neighbor suddenly drops dead right next to you, you don't know nothing about body temperature. You just know that something out there took him. So the villagers gave that something a name. They gave it a face and a rule. Don't work through the midday heat or this random lady gets you. Which means the noon wraith was basically a medieval workplace safety rule, just with a ghost attached. Anyway, once you've seen this pattern, you will see it everywhere, because there are around 100 monsters in the game and a huge part of them is directly from real folklore. Take the botchling we've talked about earlier as an example. When a family lost a child before it was born, everyone was deeply sad. And the folklore basically told everyone how to deal with the grief. Give the child a name, bury it under the doorstep of the house, and the creature transforms into something that will protect the family. That is how real people, centuries ago, dealt with the worst thing that can happen to a family. And CD Projekt built a quest around it without changing the rules. Or let's take a look at another example, the Leshen, the ancient forest spirit that commands wolves and ravens. And its name translates to he from the forest. And in medieval Poland, this Leshen became the thing villagers blamed when someone walked into the woods and never came back. And this is why the monsters in The Witcher 3 hit differently. Because usually when a studio invents a monster in a design meeting, the process probably looks somewhat like this. Make the thing big, give it some ugly teeth, and a glowing weak spot on the back so the player can shoot at it. But the monsters in The Witcher 3 come with hundreds of years of real fear already built in. Fear of the heat, fear of the forest, fear of dying without a name. And the best thing is, it probably wasn't even hard for them. All they had to do is took the fears that already existed, take the monsters that already existed, and give them some kind of form. But the genius part is what the game does to these monsters. Because a Witcher contract is never just go there and kill this thing. It's detective work. You talk to witnesses, you examine tracks, you piece together why this creature is even there and what you need to do to get rid of it. For example, if we go back to that moon wraith we talked about earlier. First of all, you have to find out if it's really a noon wraith, because those farmers might be wrong. Then, once you've confirmed that, you need to find out who that woman was. Then you need to find out what happened to her and what still ties her to this world. And very often, when you follow that trail to the end, you end up not with a monster problem, but with a human problem. And there is one quest where I had to learn this the very hard way. Because at some point in Velen, I rode into a village called Honorton, and everyone there was dead. Not killed by monster, not raided by soldiers. Cut down with clean, precise sword strikes. There is exactly one survivor, a little girl, and through her and the clues you find, Geralt figures out the truth. The man who did this must be also a witcher. So you go and track him down, and what you find is a man named Gaten, which is a witcher from the School of the Cat. And when you do find him, you see that he is wounded, and he tells you his side of the story. And there he reveals that the village hired him to kill a Leshen. He did his part of the job, risked his life for it, and instead of paying him the price they agreed on, the villagers decided it was cheaper to lure him into a trap and kill him. However, he survived the trap, and then he did what he was trained to do his whole life. And I'm going to be honest with you, when I first stood there and listened to his story, something about him felt off. For some reason, I just didn't believe him, so I decided to still fight him. And to this day, I'm still not completely sure if I did the right thing or not. But that's the core. That's what this game does to you. Half the time, the thing you're hunting is not the actual problem, and the game makes you figure out what to do about it. And these decisions are the next layer of why The Witcher 3 feels so real. Because this game does something with your choices almost no other game dares to do. It makes you live with them. But the decision with Dayton is pretty small compared to how far-reaching the thing was that happened in the swamp to me. So let's talk about it. See, somewhere during the Baron's questline, you get into Crookback Bog, which itself is a pretty ugly area. And they will find a group of orphans living around an old lady they just called Gran. Now, the part of the swamp where they are living belongs to the crones. And these are three ancient, pretty ugly things. I really don't know how to describe them better. But the villagers, they worship them like some kind of gods. And they bring them tributes in the form of human ears. However, those ears are not everything those crones want. They also want to eat the children. Now, while we as the players are working our way through the swamp, you come across the village of Downwarren and get a quest there, where the villagers tell you that something underneath the old tree on the hill is whispering, and that this thing is driving people insane. Now, when you do actually get there, which is quite hard to find because the entrance is somewhat hidden, you find a spirit trapped under the roots of that tree, and tells you that the crones are evil, that they will kill the orphans, and it offers you to save them if you free the spirit. On the other side, the crones want the spirit dead, and they tell you a wildly different story. Because they will tell you that the spirit is actually evil and that it's some kind of ancient monster that will kill all the people in Downwarren. And this is where the game just tells you to make a decision. You have to decide between bad and worse. Because let's be honest, neither the crones nor the spirit seems like something you'd actually root for. And on top of all of that is a classic dilemma. Either save a handful of orphans or save an entire village. When I made this decision, I decided to kill the spirit. Because at that moment, I believed it was the right one. To this day, it still leaves me thinking if there is actually a right decision to this whole thing. But maybe you can tell me your decision down in the comments. Anyways, whatever you pick, the game just moves on like nothing really happened. And I believed it was just another monster contract. However, once I kept pushing the Baron's story, it turned out that this seemingly small decision actually made a huge impact. Because what the game didn't tell you is that your decision in that quest decided what was going to happen with the Baron's family. See, Gran, the old lady serving the crones, it turns out that she is the Baron's missing wife. And when you return to the swamp together with the Baron to save her, you are faced with the decision you've made. Because it turns out that the spirit was right, and the crones took the children. I probably don't have to describe to you what happened to them, but here's the insane part. Because Anna, the Baron's wife, her mind was completely broken, and not even the Baron could recognize what the crones left over. When you then go and talk to the Baron, he tells you that he will take what's left of his wife, load her on a cart, and search some kind of healer in the hope to fix her. As you can imagine, this decision definitely haunted me, because I thought I generally made the wrong one. So I went online to find out what the other option was. And honestly, I still don't know what was better. Because if you free the spirit, it keeps its promise, it saves the orphans, but everything else falls apart. Which means the spirit slaughters the village, and because you made the crones angry, they are going to kill Anna. But it doesn't stop there, because if you do that and the barons find out, he goes back to his fortress and also, well, ends it. And this is what makes the decision so much more real than any other we have talked about. Because with Gaten, you know what happens when you draw your sword. But what happened in the swamp? Really, I couldn't have predicted that. This is also how real life goes. Sometimes the decisions you make have some extremely long-term consequences, which you don't even realize when you are actively making those decisions. And that's what makes The Witcher 3 feel so real. The developers put so much work into making sure that there's no obvious good choice. You have to take everything into account you have seen, make an educated guess, and see where it goes. And now let's compare that to other RPGs. Most of them give you the illusion of making an impact in the story. You have dialogue options where you can choose between 5 different options, but at the end, nothing serious or bad will happen. Because the game only has 2 or 3 endings. But The Witcher? This game has 36 end states where the world can end in, depending on the choices you've made. Now, at the same time, the game does a masterful job at making you forget why Geralt even goes into that swamp. It gets you so invested into the Baron's questline that you almost forget that the main story of The Witcher is all about finding Ciri, which is the part that makes Geralt, despite being a mutant, feeling extremely real, because he acts like a father searching for his daughter. And the crazy part is, which you probably already know, Ciri isn't even Geralt's real biological daughter, simply because Witchers can't have children. However, because Geralt took her in as a little girl, raised her and trained her, he treats her like his real daughter. And here, the game does something extremely brilliant to make sure you feel the relationship between them without them ever seeing each other for like 3/4 of the game. See, in most normal games, like The Legend of Zelda or Super Mario, the princess is simply in a different castle, and you are 100% sure that by the end of the game, you will save her. The Witcher 3, on the other side, does something completely different. Every time Geralt finds some real hints or people that actually met Ciri, the game switches to her perspective, and you are playing as Ciri, living through exactly what happened to her at that exact place. The game makes sure that you also build a personal relationship with Ciri. You get to see her fighting style, the way she teleports through her fights, and her pretty unique personality, where she makes stupid jokes in situations she really shouldn't. And through all of that playtime, the fights and the dialogue you get with her, the game makes sure that you as the player are personally invested in finding her and to make sure that she gets a good ending. Which means that every single time Geralt feels like he gets close to finally finding her and gets disappointed once more, you as the player don't lose interest in finding her, because you are looking for someone you basically know. And then, the game plays its best card, because when Geralt finally finds her on an island lost in fog, she is just laying there, and it looks like she didn't make it. The camera slowly rotates to Geralt, and the man who just fought himself through half a continent, killing countless monsters and taking everything like a man, just breaks. For a few agonizingly slow seconds, nothing happens. And I'm not going to lie, when she finally woke up, this scene really got me. Now this is where most games would usually end. You found the princess, maybe you're going to fight some big enemy guy, and that's it. And this is exactly where CD Projekt Red outwrote the entire industry. And to me personally, it's one of the most insane design choices I have ever seen in a game. Because the real ending of the game, which means what happened to Ciri and the big payoff for you playing this game for like hundreds of hours, is not decided right before the end of the game. It's decided by small decisions that are all scattered through the last third of the game, where you decide what kind of father you are to Ciri. For example, she is frustrated after a setback. Do you tell her to calm down, or do you tell her she doesn't have to be perfect? Or when she is furious and wants to trash a lavatory, do you stop her, or do you let her rage and even join her? Or my personal favorite one, and the single most important thing you can do for the ending of a 100-hour fantasy game, is to start a snowball fight with her. And here is what makes this genius. The game quietly watches how you treat her. Do you control her, or do you trust her? Do you treat her like a child that needs protection, or like a young woman that just needs someone that believes in her? And depending on how you handle these small moments, Ciri either finds her own path, or she doesn't make it at all. Now compare that to any other RPG you know. Most games decide how the game ends with a final battle, a set check, or one big dramatic button. But The Witcher 3 decides it with parenting. And the funniest part of all of this, the actual villain of the game, the Wild Hunt, whose name is even on the cover of the game, is probably the most forgettable part of the entire experience. I mean, I remember that this was some evil elf king with a skull helmet, but I couldn't tell you his name without googling it. I mean, just think about how crazy that is. CD Projekt wrote the story between Ciri and Geralt so well that most players even forget the main villain. Most AAA studios couldn't even do it, even if their entire existence was dependent on it, which right now it literally does, but that's a whole different story. And I believe that even if they had the ability to write a story like this, they wouldn't release something like this because it's too risky. So, the question becomes, who is bold enough to write a video game like this and make it feel so real that for over a decade you can't get the story out of your head? And the answer to that starts with two guys from Warsaw selling video games at a marketplace. And it involves one of the worst business decisions in the entire history of book writing. See, the year is 1994 in Warsaw, Poland, at a giant computer bazaar. And somewhere between those market stalls stand two high school friends, Marcin and Michael. And no, I'm still not attempting to pronounce Polish last names. Now, these two are selling imported video games from abroad. And to understand why that alone was so special, you need to understand the setting. Poland had just come out of communism, which means money was tight, PC games were a luxury item, and nobody actually paid for them. If you want to know more about that, make sure to stick around until the end of the video to see how Steam was the company to end video game piracy in all of Eastern Europe. But first, let's take a look at what it was like. Because copying video games was completely normal, and for a long time, there wasn't even a real law against it. And even though nobody was buying video games, these two thought it was a good idea to take $2,000 trying to sell original video games on some bazaar in Poland. I probably don't have to explain to you that this idea was worse than selling bottled water next to a free river. But they had one idea that nobody else in the market took seriously, that actually made them competitive. They treated Polish gamers like actual customers. So what they did is to sell games in Polish boxes, added Polish manuals, and even eventually went one step further and fully translated the games into Polish. And then one game released that changed everything for them: Baldur's Gate, one of the biggest RPGs in the 90s. And the two of them got the rights to publish the game in Poland, which means instead of doing cheap translations on their own, they went the full 9 yards. Which means they basically added Polish voice acting with some of the most famous actors in the country. This was basically the 1999 equivalent of hiring Keanu Reeves to star in Cyberpunk 2077. Whoever would come up with an idea like this. But it paid off. Because on release day, they shipped 18,000 copies in a country where everyone thought people wouldn't pay for video games. However, it turns out people pay when you find out what they want and give it to them. Keep that in mind because this will become important in just a second. Now, at some point, these two decided they didn't just want to sell other people's video games anymore. And this decision happened is because they were supposed to bring a Baldur's Gate spin-off to PC, but somehow in the last second, the deal collapsed. Which was a pretty heavy hit for them, because by that time, they had actually built a small team for that project. But instead of firing them all, they decided that with all of the manpower they had, they would just go and make their own game. On paper, this seemed like another absolutely horrible idea. And this is simply because they have never made their own game before, in a country that basically had no own gaming industry. But they were so sure that it would work that they were willing to bet everything on it. They just knew they had to find a good enough story. And that good enough story quickly became their unfair advantage, because Poland already had a giant fantasy universe that every single person in the country knew, which are the Witcher books. Now, what's important to mention here is that the Witcher books in Poland isn't nerd culture. It's a story everyone knows. It's like asking someone in the United States if they know about The Wizard of Oz, or asking someone from England if they know Sherlock Holmes. Which means if you are a Polish studio looking for the best possible story for your first game, The Witcher is exactly the right answer. So, in the early 2000s, they went and bought the video game rights from the author. And how exactly that deal went down is its own insane story, which I'm going to tell you in just a second. But first, CD Projekt had to survive. And the first Witcher game came out in 2007, and it was pretty bare bones. They had janky combat, technical errors, and all the problems of the first try. However, it was received pretty well. So 4 years later, they decided to release part number 2, which became even more popular. So with The Witcher 3, they decided to go all in and bet the entire company on the success of this game. And this is where the numbers from the beginning of the video came back. Because The Witcher 3, the whole gigantic world, the 450,000 words and the 950 speaking roles cost about $81 million to create, which also includes the marketing. Just to put that into perspective, Star Wars Outliers is estimated to cost about $350 million to make. Starfield, somewhere between 400 and 450 million. Which means that The Witcher 3 competes against games that cost 4 to 6 times more to make, but they still managed to make their game feel more real than any other of them. And you can even still see the origin story of these two market traders in the finished game, because The Witcher 3 shipped in 15 language versions, where 7 of them had full voice acting with over 500 voice actors worldwide. Now, why am I telling you this? Well, you will see what that has to do with the realism in just a second. But first, let's get back to that riot seal from the early 2000s. Because as I told you earlier, The Witcher 3 has sold 65 million copies. It's one of the most successful games in history. And the original author, the one who invented the entire Witcher universe, he got a one-time payment of reportedly less than $10,000. And the reason why he took that deal might be the best story I have heard this entire year. So, the man who wrote the entire lore of The Witcher is a man called Andrew Sapkowski. And in Poland, this man has roughly the status of J.K. Rowling in England. And in the early 2000s, the founders of CD Projekt Red showed up at his doorstep and wanted to buy the video game rights for his life's work. Now, what's important to mention about Sapkowski? At this time, he was a fantasy author in his 50s. He doesn't play video games. In fact, he doesn't even like them. And the two guys in front of him don't represent some giant corporation. I mean, like I said earlier, at this point, they haven't even released a single game. And since they didn't have a lot of money, they offered him a deal. They wanted to give him a percentage of all future profits. Now, looking at this from Sapkowski's perspective, he probably did the math in his head. Look at the two guys in front of him. Here's that they founded a studio nobody knows, have never released a single game in a country with no gaming industry, and he said no. Years later, when he was asked what happened, he retold the moment himself, saying, "They offered me a percentage of their profits. I said, no, there will be no profit at all. Give me all my money right now, the whole amount." And that amount, as far as we know, was less than $10,000 for the rights to everything. In the interview, he further said, "I was stupid enough to leave everything in their hands because I didn't believe in their success." Now here's the thing, and this is where we have to be fair to Sapkowski, because his decision was completely rational. Almost every licensed video game at that time was a cheap cash grab. Polish game developers basically didn't exist. And if someone with no track record offers you shares of something that doesn't exist yet, 99 times out of 100, taking the cash right away is the right call. However, this was unfortunately the 100th time. Because as you know, the game exploded. 3 games later, the universe he was created was a global phenomenon, with 65 million copies sold, and Sapkowski's entire share of that, well, again, was $10,000 and a handshake. But it gets even more insane, because years later, he was again asked in an interview if he changed his mind on video games, and if he tried to play one of the Witcher games. And he said this: "How much substance can there be in the lines of text where the hero walks through the woods and talks to his krill? Where's the literature in that?" And that's the part that got me. He was so little interested in the game, or so heartbroken that he simply wouldn't touch it, that he knew nothing about what they did with his universe. He doesn't know about the 450,000 word script. He doesn't know what they changed to his story, and he doesn't know why everyone on Earth loves this game so much. However, in 2018, Sapkowski decided that the $10,000 and the handshake he got was not enough. And his lawyer sent a letter to CD Projekt Red demanding 60 million zloty, which is about $16 million. Now, usually you should think that a deal is a deal, and this guy sold his rights to it. End of the story. However, Polish copyright law sees this wildly different. If an author sells his rights and the payment turns out to be absurdly out of proportion to the success, he can legally demand more. It's called, and I wish I was joking, the bestsellers clause. Poland literally has a law designed for "I sold my masterpiece for pocket change and now I regret it." Now, CD Projekt could have probably fought this and sent their own lawyers, saying that a deal is a deal. But instead of dragging Sapkowski through a 10-year-long lawsuit, they decided to quietly settle it. Nobody knows the exact number. The official statement goes that it solidifies the relationship between them. The game turned his books into international bestsellers, and Sapkowski was finally getting rich of the universe he invented back in the 80s. However, just in the most ridiculous way possible, by constantly insulting the game that made him rich and famous, but still taking the money. So again, why am I telling you this whole story, and why is it relevant for the realism in the game? And the answer is pretty simple. It's because the people who bought the game's rights love the books even more than its own author, and they want to prove to Sapkowski what video games can actually do. But proving this came at a price. And this almost broke the players' trust in CD Projekt, and one that actually broke some of the people who worked at the game. So let's jump to the year 2013, and CD Projekt shows the world the first big trailer of The Witcher 3. As you probably know, the trailer was absolutely stunning. It was one of the most promising games ever seen, with its lighting, the graphics, and the entire world overall. Millions of people watched this and thought, this is what the next generation of gaming looks like. So they went ahead and pre-ordered the game based on exactly this trailer. And when the game came out in 2015, it looked way different. I mean, if you've played the game back then, it was still okay-ish, but it looked nothing like the trailer. And the internet did what the internet does best. Within days, there are side-by-side comparison videos everywhere, and everyone was screaming that they got scammed. Now, usually when something like this happens and big publishers screw over their fans like this, you get a statement by 12 lawyers saying that the footage was representative of a work-in-progress game. But the co-founder of CD Projekt went into an interview saying, "We don't feel good about it. If they made their buying decisions based on the 2013 materials, I'm deeply sorry about that." Now personally, on the one side, I can 100% understand that the publisher saying sorry about a failed launch without taking any action means nothing. But we'll get into what CD Projekt did to make up for that in just a second. But on the other side, I kinda blame myself for it, because I remember being upset about this too. And the reason for that is simple. If you think about what happened there, the game with the best writing I have ever seen had produced the biggest launch controversy about pixelated grass. There were countless YouTube videos spending the launch weeks comparing screenshots of water footage in the same game where a drunk warlord carries his child in tears to a doorstep. The story of the year was right there, and all of us were angry about the fact that Geralt's hair were floating even if there was no wind. And I know, I do a lot of finger pointing at us players now, but I just want to say that the game was never perfect, especially at launch. And a lot of the small things people pointed out were actually legit. The combat was janky, Roach, which is your horse, had a personal problem with physics and regularly ended up on rooftops. Half the loot is completely useless, and Skellige's Ocean was so full of copy and paste question markers that my eyes still start switching when I think about it. But here's the great thing about this. Luckily, no one of us remembers Witcher 3 for any of this. We remember Witcher 3 because the entire world was built with so much care that the flaws stopped mattering. But that care and that realism had a price. Because when 240 people build a world this size in 3.5 years, on a budget 6 times smaller than the competition, the people working on the game had to do a lot of overtime. See, in the years after release, reports and interviews got leaked of what it was like to work at CD Projekt Red during that time. And working there meant a lot of crunch time with nights and weekends spent at the desk, and a lot of people leaving the company completely burned out. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend it's okay, because it isn't. But that's the price CD Projekt and the entire team working on the game had to pay for making a masterpiece. And unfortunately, this is not a rare exception at the gaming industry. I mean, just look at what happened during the development of Red Dead Redemption 2. But that's a topic for a different video. Now, because of all of this, what happened next made so little sense. Because a studio that just bet everything on one game and won had every reason to start monetizing their game heavily. If this was Bethesda, they would have probably added a season pass, paid map packs, and a horse armor for like $25. However, CD Projekt looked at their millions of new fans, and a lot of them who still had a sour taste in their mouth because of the graphics, and they decided to start giving those players things for free. And I don't mean one apologetic bonus item like 500 atoms like once more Bethesda did, because in the weeks after launch, CD Projekt started releasing 2 free DLC packs per week, with new quests, new armor sets, and new looks for the characters. In total, they gave the players 16 free things, and the last one was the entire New Game Plus mode completely for free. Now, if that sounds a little shallow to you, I can completely understand that. But you need to remember that it was in 2015. The entire gaming industry had just spent almost a decade perfecting the art of cutting content out of finished games so they could sell it back to the players piece by piece. I mean, the amount of day one DLCs, season passes, and skins I have seen are ridiculous. In the middle of all of that is a studio that ships 16 pieces of content for free. But the point where it got absolutely ridiculous was with the expansions. The first one was the Hearts of Stone DLC, which gives you another 10 hours of content, including the greatest written and most fascinating villain I have ever seen, Gaunter O'Dim. Even to this day, I watch videos that try to explain who or what he really was. And I highly recommend you, if you like the Witcher lore, to check these videos about Gaunter O'Dim out, because they are truly amazing. But then, in 2016 came Blood and Wine, and calling this thing an add-on or expansion is almost an insult, because it added an entire new country to the game that is nothing like the original game. As we talked about earlier, usually the world was riddled by war and overall miserable. However, the region of Toussaint was more like a bright fairy tale version. Now this DLC came with over 30 hours of content and was bigger than a lot of full-priced games. This DLC alone was so good that at Game Awards 2016 it won the award for Best RPG of the World. And this is nothing short of insane, because it was competing against full-priced games and still won. It's like a bonus track on some random album winning Song of the Year. But this just shows how much CD Projekt cares about their fans. And this philosophy isn't even limited to The Witcher, because CD Projekt also runs GOG, a game store where everything is sold completely without copy protection. Because they think if you treat customers fairly, you don't need to treat them like suspects who will steal your games. And this is a strategy that Steam perfected. And like I promised you earlier, we'll get to that at the end. Now, all of this together, the somewhat okayish launch, the free content, and the extremely cheap expansions created something that no marketing budget in the world can buy. The players started to trust CD Projekt. And this can be perfectly seen at the numbers. Up to this day, The Witcher 3 has collected more than 200 Game of the Year awards, which makes it one of the most awarded games in history. But you can see it even better in one single stat. Because in December 2019, 4.5 years after release, The Witcher 3 broke its own all-time player record on Steam. Why? Because Netflix had just released The Witcher show with Henry Cavill, and millions of people watched it, thought, I need more of this world, and they went all to the same place and went playing the game. And yes, I also watched the show right until Henry Cavill left, and that's all I'm going to say about it. And I know this was a lot of information, so let's take a step back and look at why The Witcher 3 felt so real and why it holds such a special place in all of our hearts. First, they made sure to go out of their way to write a story that gets the player invested in any way possible. They build a world that feels real with everything that belongs to it, even though there are monsters in it and you have an entire fairy tale region. Second, they wrote every single character, even side characters, so well that you remember them for years. And third, they made you personally invested into the whole story, that you literally feel like you are a part of that world. And on top of that, they decided to stand up for their mistakes and make up for it multiple times by giving free stuff and extremely cheap priced DLCs that are better than most full-priced games. And if you stack all of that together, You create a game that people are still buying a decade later and make videos about. And when I thought about all of this, I faced a question I simply couldn't get out of my head. If the blueprint to creating a game like this is this obvious and this profitable, why has no one copied it? I mean, it's not like it's a big secret if a guy like me who failed at math class can find that out. Literally every publisher on the planet watched this game print money. They have seen the interviews and they have seen the entire marketing strategy. And yet, in 10 years, no big studio has seriously tried to do what CD Projekt Red did. So the question becomes, why is no one doing it? And the first answer is, well, it's definitely not about money. See, Ubisoft, EA or Activision, all of them, could pay CD Projekt's budget out of the marketing account of one Call of Duty game. And it's also not about talent either. I bet these companies employ thousands of brilliant writers and designers, and most of them would probably kill for a chance to build a questline like the Bloody Baron. The answer is much more boring, and this is exactly what makes it so sad. The entire story building is invincible. You can show ray tracing in a trailer, you can print over 1,000 planets on the back of a box, you can put photorealistic pores in a 4K screenshot. But what you can't tell people is that the story of this drunk warlord will haunt you for over a decade. It doesn't fit in a trailer, you can't screenshot it out of context, and there is no measurement graph for it. It's simply not justifiable for a CEO who stands in front of his investors and tells them, we're going to spend 3 extra years and an extra $10 million to, well, write more words. Because that doesn't sound good. And personally, I haven't heard about a story of a CEO that tried. But I imagine the headlines would look like that. CEO went crazy, stock charts went down, and he got fired. That would probably happen. And this is why they don't write stories like this anymore. And I know this goes way deeper than that, and there are also countless of other reasons, like trying to make games for the most casual of gamers so they could sell more copies, or making everything politically correct. But that would be a topic for a different video. Now before you go and write an angry comment, I know there are exceptions, like Baldur's Gate 3. But if you look closer at it, you will notice that it came from Lariat Studios, which is another independent, mid-sized publisher that spent years and years on writing. And when it blew up, most of the big gaming companies call it simply an outlier, as if they were trying to say, please don't expect this from us as the new standard. All we want is to write another shallow Assassin's Creed story to grab your money. And here is where the paradox begins, because the survival of huge gaming companies literally depends on learning that you can't measure a game in a spreadsheet. And if you don't believe me, just look at the last 2 years. Those companies all had record layoffs. Tens of thousands of developers lost their jobs. Countless of live service games were shut down in months, only because they refused to go back to their roots. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that if they start following the same path as The Witcher 3, everything will be a guaranteed massive hit. That certainly wouldn't be the case, and pulling off that strategy is hard, even for the CD Projekt Red. We have all seen that with Cyberpunk 2077, where they hyped the game massively only to launch a broken mess of a game, and it took them years and countless man-hours to fix the game to a state where it's actually enjoyable. But that's also what makes the next 2 years so interesting, because it's the ultimate test for CD Projekt Red with The Witcher 4 in my eyes. And this time, they are not just 240 hungry people in Warsaw with something to prove anymore. They are now also a giant company, and the question is if a big successful corporation can still write a story like if they have nothing to lose. And this brings us back to the original question. Why did The Witcher 3 feel so real? And the answer is that it was never the graphics that gave this game its soul. I mean, the graphics literally caused the biggest shitstorm the game ever had. The Witcher 3 feels real because it's built out of the same things we see in real life. A marriage that failed, a broken guy who made the wrong deal, and a father who ruined everything and desperately tries to fix it. It gives you the freedom to make decisions with the best information available to you, and you still make the wrong one. And it gives you creatures that don't even exist, but it makes them feel real because people invented them centuries ago to explain things they had no clue about. And that's why, more than a decade after release, you still can't tell me the name of the main villain, but you can tell me exactly what you did at that tree in the swamp, and how the Baron's story ended for you. Because real was never something you rendered. Real is something you write. And if you want to know what I promised you throughout the video, how Steam beat video game piracy by doing nothing, it's right here on the screen.